Alright, hello and welcome to Art on the Go. Today we're going to be talking about how to do some basic shading. We're going to go over cubes and spheres today just to show you. Make a little still life. We have our supplies here. We have Vine charcoal, we have a paper blender, an eraser, a charcoal pencil, and some sandpaper. I also have a graphite pencil. Probably not going to be using this too much. First things first, you're going to take your sandpaper and you're going to create a medium ground to shade off of. So that, I'm just going to rub my Vine charcoal against my sandpaper and let it fall onto my paper like that. Okay. Now once we have pretty good coverage on our paper of all our sandpapered charcoal, you can use your paper blender for this. I'm going to use my hands. You're just going to rub that around. If you don't want to get your hands too dirty, you can also use a tissue or a paper towel for this part of it. And your background doesn't have to be perfectly even. It just has to provide a nice medium ground for us to work off of, because what we're going to do is we're going to be erasing to get our highlights and using our pencil and our Vine charcoal to get our deep darks. So first things first, I'm going to keep using my Vine charcoal and I'm going to sketch in a circle. And if I don't like where my circle is at, this is why we're using the Vine charcoal to do this. So you don't even have to pick up your eraser, you can just blend it back into the background. Okay. I'm going to set them on a table. There's my cube, and there's my sphere. Now, our light source for this one is going to be coming from this direction. Which means our highlights, our brightest spots, are going to be probably like this on here, and then this area of the cube is going to have our brightest spots. So I'm going to go ahead and take my eraser and I'm just going to erase out those spots where it's going to be as bright as possible on my objects. Now, I'm not worried at this stage about erasing too much or not erasing enough, because Vine charcoal is very easy to move around the page. Alright, So now that I know where my highlights are at, I'm going to start dropping in some of my medium tones. Now on a spherical object like this, if my light source is coming from up here, obviously my brightest area is going to be right here, and then it kind of goes in rings around that. Right? So, based on where your light source is coming from. So, probably actually going to look more like this will be kind of my darkest area. And my next darkest. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop in my shades with my Vine charcoal. Okay. And I'm just gonna blend that out. If I need to get a little darker, come in here and add a little more. Now you'll notice some of my Vine charcoal is kind of piling up around the bottom. The paper can only take so much of it. So I'm just going to tap the rest off of there. Alright. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to clear back up my highlight. Alright. Now I'm going to start working on my cube before we go back in for details on this shading. So obviously this side of my cube is going to be brighter. Because my light source is coming from here, my sphere is going to cast a shadow onto my cube. I'm going to leave a little bit of space in between here just so I don't lose the edge of my sphere. Now for shadows, obviously they are darkest, closest to the object that is casting them, and they fade as they go away. They also get blurrier. Whoop, broke my charcoal in half. That's okay. So I have a nice dark spot on my cube. I'm also going to have a shadow cast from the cube onto the surface, or from the sphere onto the surface here. And that is going to connect with the very bottom of where my sphere is at, right here. That's where my shadow is going to start for that. I'll fill that in. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. So up here, this side of my cube where it is just away from the light, cubes are a lot easier to shade because they have nice specific planes to work with. I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to give that a bit of a darker shade. Okay. That side of my cube is now nice and dark. I can go back in here pull out some more of the brighter side of my cube, because it is directly facing the light source, so it's going to be nice and bright. Okay. So you'll notice as I work, the vine charcoal tends to come up from the page. So we just use it to get our base tones, and that's about it. Next we're going to go in with our charcoal pencil. I'm going to focus first on the darkest shadows that are going to be on my sphere. Now, the edge of my sphere is about right here. You can kind of see it's a little bit brighter than the darkest part of my sphere, because the darkest part of your sphere actually isn't the part that is casting the shadow and touching the cube. It's going to be just a little bit above that. There is something in shading called reflective light, and that is when the light comes down and it hits a surface over here, light bounces back, and that's where you have your reflected light. So the darkest part is actually going to be round about here on my sphere. Now I'm not being too precise about where I'm putting my pencil marks for my charcoal, because charcoal moves around the paper very easily. So I'm going to take my paper blending tool, and I can blend it out and make it nice and soft. I'm going to keep blending it in those same circles I was working in earlier. I might take my vine charcoal and add a little bit more in here. Take this and really blend it out. And just like the darkest part of your sphere isn't actually right along the very edge, the brightest part of your sphere isn't right along the very edge either. It's going to be a little further in from the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and really pull out my highlight here. And blend in around it and make that nice and smooth. Do, however, want to make the edge just a little bit lighter. Had it just a little too dark, but that's the nice thing about charcoal, is that it moves around the page very easily. And if I want to define this edge a little bit more, what I can do is I can just darken up my background right there. Voila. Just using my Vine charcoal because the Vine charcoal is softer, easier, much easier to move around the paper. Easier to get a lot of coverage quickly with it too, if you lay it on its side like that. Okay. Now I'm going to go in for the shadow that the sphere is casting. It is going to be darkest right next to the sphere. I'm just going to go in with my pencil and touch that up. That's where the edge of my cube is going to be. Alright, now on the bottom side of my cube, that's going to have a little bit of reflected light as well, coming down from the table. So there's going to be a bit of a line of lighter shading right there. I'm just going to pull it out and then kind of smudge it over, because then the cube itself is casting a shadow. Smudged it over just a little too much last time. There we go. Now the cube and the sphere will both cast in a shadow down here. So we're going to go ahead and fill that in. Again, I'm leaving that defined point of reflected light on my sphere next to the darkest part. As well as my cube here. I have just a little bit of a brighter edge than this deep, deep shadow. There we go. Now we have this edge of our cube. And again with the reflected light, so this is actually going to be the shadow that the cube casts. It's going to be down here. again, this side of the cube is going to be nice and dark because it's faced away from the light source. But we still do want to leave room for that reflected light at the very bottom edge there. Just blend that out with our paper blender here. And a lot of times you'll notice when you have very dramatic shading like this, the background of whatever piece you're looking at tends to reflect on how the objects themselves are shaded, such as like over here I left in a much darker background and I kind of made it gradiate towards a brighter over here because we have objects that are brighter over here that we want to have a stark contrast, and objects darker over here we want to have a stark contrast to the background still. So having a gradient in your background can sometimes help the shading on your objects pop. I'm just going to go in and fix that up just a little bit more. There we are. That is some basic shading on a sphere and a cube with charcoal.